The rain was falling in sheets that night when Nathaniel Ross, the billionaire CEO of a Fortune 500 company, made an unplanned return home. He was supposed to be in New York until the weekend, buried in board meetings, but something tugged at him, an unease he couldn't name. So instead of his penthouse suite, he slipped quietly into his sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. The house was dim. Only a faint glow flickered from the kitchen. At first, he assumed it was the housekeeper doing her rounds. But as he approached, he froze. There, standing in his kitchen, was Maria, the overnight janitor from his office building. She was hunched over the counter, whispering softly, and in her arms was a child. Nathaniel's instinct was alarm. What on earth was she doing here? How did she even get inside? But then he noticed the boy in her arms couldn't have been more than 6. His face was pale, his breathing labored. Maria was feeding him soup from Nathaniel's own pantry, tears slipping down her cheeks. Before Nathaniel could speak, Maria spun around, startled. "Mr. Ross, I can explain," she stammered, clutching the boy tighter as though bracing for him to throw them out. Nathaniel's commanding presence filled the room. "You'd better," he said, though his voice was softer than usual. Maria's story spilled out in trembling words. Her son Diego had collapsed with a fever that evening. She couldn't afford the clinic. She had no family nearby, no neighbors she trusted. But she remembered the mansion, how sometimes she stayed late at the office, scrubbing the marble floors long after everyone had gone, and how the CEO himself had once given her a ride when buses weren't running. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. I just needed somewhere safe, somewhere warm." For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt his hardened exterior crack. The image of his own childhood, hungry nights, a mother working double shifts just to keep him clothed, flashed through his mind. Everyone saw the billionaire, the empire, the tailored suits. Few remembered he had once been a child like Diego, small and sick in the arms of a desperate mother. He pulled out his phone and, without another word, called his private physician. Within the hour, Diego was tucked into one of the guest bedrooms, a nurse monitoring his fever. Maria sat nearby, holding her son's tiny hand, her gratitude shining in her eyes. But the night didn't end there. Nathaniel lingered by the door, watching the fragile bond between mother and child. For the first time in a long while, he asked himself, what good is all this wealth if I can't use it to ease someone's pain? The next morning, when Diego's fever finally broke, Maria tried to leave quietly. "Thank you, Mr. Ross," she whispered. "I'll never forget this. I'll pay you back somehow." But Nathaniel shook his head. "No, you'll pay it forward." He handed her a folder. Inside was a scholarship fund in Diego's name, medical coverage for the family, and an offer for Maria, not just a cleaning job, but a stable position with benefits at his company. Maria's tears flowed freely. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked. Nathaniel's voice caught. "Because once upon a time someone did the same for me." From that day forward, Maria's life transformed. Diego grew strong, and every year on his birthday, Nathaniel made a quiet visit. Not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, but as the man who had once needed kindness himself. The story spread quietly among the staff, never making headlines, never crafted into a PR stunt. But within those walls, it reminded everyone, from the janitors to the executives, that true wealth isn't measured in billions. It's measured in how deeply you choose to care when nobody's watching. Nathaniel Ross was not a man who believed in coincidences. He built his empire on precision, on calculated risks, on numbers that always had to add up. Yet that stormy night when he found himself face to face with his janitor and her sick child in his own kitchen, it felt less like chance and more like fate. He stood there silently after calling the doctor, arms crossed, watching Maria dab her son's forehead with a damp cloth. He noticed her hands trembling, not from fear of him, but from exhaustion. He realized she hadn't eaten dinner, that she probably hadn't stopped working all day. And in that moment, Nathaniel felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility. When the doctor finally arrived, Diego whimpered as the nurse set up equipment in the guest room. Maria clutched his tiny hand, whispering prayers in Spanish. Nathaniel stood near the doorway, a silent witness. The boy's fever began to drop. Relief washed over Maria's face, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself to breathe. Nathaniel could have walked away then. He could have told himself it was enough. He had done his part. But something anchored him to that room. The way Maria stroked Diego's hair reminded him of his own mother. He remembered the cramped one-bedroom apartment where he grew up, the nights his mother worked at the diner until her feet blistered, all so Nathaniel could dream bigger. He whispered to himself, "I swore I'd never forget where I came from." But he had, somewhere along the way, between the billion-dollar contracts, the corporate jets, the endless board meetings, he had let that vow slip. At dawn, Maria rose to leave. She was too proud to stay, even when Nathaniel insisted. "You've done more than enough, sir," she said softly. "I won't impose on you any longer." And Nathaniel stopped her at the door. "Maria, you didn't impose. You reminded me what matters." She looked at him with disbelief when he handed her that folder. The scholarship fund, the medical coverage, the stable job. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling over. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Nathaniel shook his head. "Yes, you do. You work harder than most people I know. You just needed someone to see you." For once, his words weren't from a CEO, a boss, or a billionaire. They were from a man who understood struggle, who remembered hunger, who had carried shame in his childhood just like Diego. The months that followed rippled with quiet transformations. Maria started her new role as an administrative coordinator, nervous at first, but blooming under the stability she'd never known before. Diego's health improved with proper care. He began excelling in school, especially in math, and Nathaniel couldn't help but smile when the boy shyly told him, "One day, I want to be a businessman like you." Nathaniel chuckled. "No, Diego. Be better than me." But what struck Nathaniel most wasn't the change in Maria or Diego. It was the change in himself. At board meetings, he noticed the faces of his employees differently. He began asking questions he never had before. Do our lowest paid staff have health care? Are their families secure? What happens when the janitor's child gets sick? His executives were stunned. Nathaniel Ross, the notoriously ruthless dealmaker, was suddenly championing daycare programs, employee scholarships, and free clinic services. Some whispered he had gone soft. Others quietly admitted he had gone human. What they didn't know was that it all started one stormy night in a quiet kitchen. 2 years later, Maria stood at the back of a university auditorium, tears in her eyes, as Diego walked across the stage in cap and gown. He was the first in his family to graduate college. Nathaniel was there too, clapping louder than anyone, pride swelling in his chest. And when Diego gave his speech, he didn't thank Nathaniel the billionaire or Nathaniel the CEO. He thanked Nathaniel the man who opened his door when we had nowhere else to go.